Hi everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Next up we have Andy Barker, and he's going to be giving his talk from the HSE Virtual Series Congress in October.
So yeah, thanks for a lovely introduction and for your continued trust. I think what you have here is an ability to collect some great thinkers, some great people together, and share what's going on and how to make all of us better. And I think, personally, the thinking that I have to put into the presentations, I think, has helped me be a better safety professional. So the fact that you're inviting me on to talk means that I'm becoming a better person myself. So I've got a lot to thank you for. Anyway, this presentation I'm going through today is part cry for help and part challenge. As a safety professional, let me start at the beginning. I got into safety because I was told to. I didn't want to. I didn't like safety. I didn't like the messages that I heard from the safety people, and I didn't understand how they added any value. But of course, when the boss said, please go to safety, I said, of course, I would love to. Thank you very much, boss. Because it's very hard to disagree with the boss. And perhaps he knew what was good for me more than I did. Who knew at the time? But when I arrived, I discovered it was the way the message was being put across that had me disengaged. And really, I've fought really hard to work out how to get people engaged, because the message is too important to get wrong, really. So thank you. Since this is the Middle East conference, I really wanted to kind of try and help people understand the issues that we face, because we're all in this together. And the issues that we see here are, to be honest, just the same as we see everywhere else. But what I wanted to do is really challenge some of the beliefs that we have around here. So, the whole thing about relationships and how they work in the Middle East is very important, and also it has a big influence on safety. So when you look at how people come together, and I'm going to talk predominantly about construction, but it works at any level. If you look at how a construction project comes together, and you bring the contributors, the various organizations together, it's those relationships and how you perceive each other, the beliefs that you have about each other are very important. And some of those beliefs affect your view of their relative competence, but some of the way that we put things together can kind of devalue the competence that individuals need actually to make good decisions in safety. The other thing is there's a big belief that to be competitive, safety is expensive, so we'd much rather take profit over safety. And we're all in business to be profitable. There aren't many organizations that can continue not to be profitable and survive, to be frank. So we're all in to make money, but I really need to challenge this competitiveness versus safety in some way. The other thing is that, as said in the brief on this, the accepted standard it's consistent across the Middle East, right? Now, the oil and gas industry is pretty much as old as anywhere else in the Middle East as it is anywhere else in the world. And actually, it's talent from all over the world that came to the Middle East to teach it how to, drill for oil and so on and so forth. So I think it's pretty false to say that it's a maturing culture or whatever. It is mature, and a great many of us have allowed it to mature to what it is in today. So, how is it that we can really change that? Are we actually pushing for change? And what's the role of the HSE professional, right? Do we actually know how to change this? So I'm going to go through a little bit of organizational theory, hopefully in a way that we can understand in the context of my life in this role as a blue-collar contractor, hence the cry for help. But I'm going to take you through some case studies that I've actually worked on that have changed the business model in the Middle East as a proof that it's positive, but we need help. I know Paradigm are a great supporter. We had conversations this morning, and I follow Gareth Locke on LinkedIn, who posts some really cool stuff. If you don't know what the Oxford Review is, find them and subscribe. There's some wonderful material that's coming out. And this is a very, very short, really easy to digest, which is what the Oxford Review is all about, really easy to digest piece of information. And it was why professionals do things counter to the professional values, ethics, beliefs. And we do it frequently. And you go through the document, and it really says the winner is bureaucracy. So what it kind of says is that for you to fit in to an organization, for you to fit into a culture, for you to fit into a country, you kind of give us a bit of yourself up in doing that in order to work out how to preserve your position. Perhaps it's about advancement or whatever. So you kind of have to go along with the way things get done around here sometimes. And I understand this. Myself, I'm not happy with a great deal of things that I have to put up within my own organization, right? I would love to change the way that we house workers, the way that we feed workers, the way that they're treated in the accommodation. And making inroads on that now, which I couldn't have done 3 years ago when I came out here 3.5 years ago. But as part of a longer plan, I'm getting there. But the point is that today and now, my professional values, ethics, and beliefs are kind of compromised a bit by what it is that I see, and I know that I can't fight that right now. So it's easy to get stuck into an environment where you have to accept stuff, pick the fights that you can win in the hope that you can move things on. The question is whether you get lost in that or whether you can still see your way through it. So it's a really, really interesting paper. I'd encourage you to look at it. Now, I wanted to share, as I say, some case studies, looking at some bad things that happened and what it is that we learned from it. What I faced, and this this photograph comes from a construction project actually in North Africa, but it's Morocco, so an Arabic nation. What the incident investigation quite clearly said, and it wasn't wrong, it quite clearly said that the construction people didn't follow the construction process for erecting the pipe rack that you see being built here. What happened is that they didn't put the secondary steel in that gives a structure rigidity. They put up the primary steel to come back and put the secondary steel in later on. But one of the H beams here got knocked, wasn't supported well, it fell, and it took out, like dominoes, as you can see here, a great many. Now, we had two individuals in the MUP here, the cherry picker, and I do not know how they got away with this, but the H-beam kind of went over the top of them and took the basket off. It's hanging on there actually by its hydraulic cylinder. Two individuals wearing their work positioning lanyards got away with minor cuts and bruises. Now, the story told was the construction team didn't do it properly, the safety guy didn't do the appropriate monitoring, and so on and so forth, and that's right. But nobody's going to learn anything unless you really get to the root cause of what actually went on here. And it took listening to people and talking to people and fishing and so on and so forth. And it took a great deal of trust, to be honest, to get to the root. And what happened is the chief financial officer of the construction company in question phoned directly the construction manager and said, "We have cash flow issues. Please put up lots of steel, because if you can put up lots of steel, we will get paid more at the end of this month." And what he was actually referring to is the way that the contract was structured to incentivize construction. The client put a contract together saying, "We will pay you by the ton." The primary steel is heavy, the secondary steel is light. If you spend your time putting up the primary steel, you can get paid more money. Now, our own professionals, and I worked for an engineering consultancy firm that were in the middle between client and contractor here. Our own professional contracts people couldn't persuade the client to change their view. The client is a manufacturer. They buy raw material by the ton. So they transferred that learning into construction and said, we will pay by the ton. We couldn't persuade them otherwise. So as the professional value and integrity was lost a little bit because the client is powerful, and eventually they gave in. So the root cause here is actually a client that doesn't understand how construction works and wasn't really up for listening to a bunch of construction people that showed up and said, you're wrong, you should do it differently. It was a very difficult conversation to take that back into the client organization, because this isn't an easy environment to talk about blame. So I learned an awful lot about how to have a conversation in this arena. But there was similar things going on, and this is a different project, a different time, a different location, but still in the same overall program of works. And this actually was a fatal accident, and the top left-hand, very amateur drawing there illustrates how an individual was expected to pass between the beams that you see on the right-hand side there in order to do some work on the inside. And on one occasion when coming out, the individual caught his head on the top beam, and as the mute continued to travel, unfortunately, the fatal injury that he sustained occurred. Now, what is the root cause here? There was lots of talk about, a mute was transferring materials and people to a work location, which it isn't supposed to be for. It's a working platform, and so on and so forth. So there's lots of talk about construction. Actually, nobody had thought about how to build this at the time it was in design. And actually, there was no contractual deliverables for constructability. There was no contractual obligation to engage with contractors and say, how would you build this? So what happened was a prefabricated building designed for its end use, not considering how something should be constructed. And again, that, who should we talk to when we're putting projects together? Whose expertise is important? And if you're an engineer, you're not necessarily a construction expert. If you're a construction expert, you're not an engineer. But bringing those two minds together might get a different outcome. So again, it's that understanding of who should we talk to and when, and who should we listen to. And I've woven mental health a few times into things, and I want you all to think about, what's on this slide in relation to your own professional position in the organization. Are you being listened to? Do you have the opportunity to speak up? Does your organization get the opportunity to speak up? Are you engaged? Do you have the right forum? Because the frustration that gets built up between, well, I wouldn't have done it that way, but nobody asked me, is immense, and it's damaging in the long term. So, that we've got to feel engaged. We've got to feel that we have the right amount of influence, and we've got to speak up for our organization to protect it in the long term, especially when we can see where we can add value. So, if you're having a bad day because you're not being listened to, it spreads, it kind of sticks with you, right? And it sticks inside organizations, and it sticks inside your organizational memory, right? And I've seen firsthand what happens when senior people from from the various companies that I represent, from what I've seen in other organizations, when you don't get listened to, you go out and you shout at people in the business, which makes them retract a little bit more. But what I'd like, and this is the plea for help, right? We've got different people from different backgrounds here. Today I'm speaking to you as a blue collar worker. I've been a client, I've been a management consultant, I've been a principal contractor, I've been in pretty much any industry you can think about. And where I've seen differences being made is where you give people the opportunity to speak. So I'd like you all to think about, the balance between listening and talking that you do with the project contributors that you work alongside, because I can guarantee you that there's more value from listening than talking sometimes. And because you're in a certain position in an organization doesn't mean that you have power over them. In fact, I think you're more powerful if you listen and get to understand and grow your knowledge about what other people have to say from their perspective and their own experience. So if you truly believe that people are a solution, then you should be doing more listening. If you think people are a problem, then I can guarantee you're doing more talking. And certainly in what I've seen, clients and consultants will tell me what to do more than they will listen to my views and opinions. And I really want to touch on that. So emotions drive behavior. Go and have a look at how brain chemistry works, if you like. I've learned an awful lot from doing that. And the test here is if you believe something, if you believe a story, you believe that the contractors are the problem, you believe that the workers get hurt because they don't follow the rules, then it becomes very difficult to listen to the person, because if they're saying something different, it kind of rocks your belief, right? So it's very hard to be supportive of an idea if you don't like what the person, where they come from, or you already know what the answer is to the problem. So just think about those different conversations you have. Think about how difficult it is to disagree with a boss, even if they have a bad idea, right? And that kind of knocks your professional integrity and your ethics a little bit, but it's hard, right? It's hard because of the inherent chemistry in our brain, because of the threat that goes along with, potentially being embarrassed or embarrassing somebody that's powerful, and so on and so forth. But, think of your own narrative even and how you defend it, right? We're all very, very precious about our own ideas. And if we say, we're going to embark in a particular direction, if it's not working, it becomes very hard to defend, but we do. So the final thing here is how are you persuaded by the acceptable answer in your organization? I had a lot of work to change the acceptable answers in my organization from things like accident investigations. And we were having a lot of accidents a few years ago, and people were saying the worker did something wrong, therefore that was the injury. And everybody accepted that, but we didn't learn anything, and accidents continued. So it's not just about that. As I say, I used to work for a very, very prominent engineering consultancy, global organization. And I remember sitting in California, and the CEO came in, as they always did, to address the annual gathering of safety professionals. And a guy called Zach asked the CEO, what keeps you awake about this team at night? And he said, I don't know if you're good enough. And then he paused, and then he said, but hang on, I don't know if the organization is good enough, because I've challenged us not to hurt anybody anymore, and we still are. And what I observed around the room was 50% of the safety professionals going, I like what you said second, because I'm part of this organization, and therefore it's not me that's the problem. And 50% of the organization said, I think I might be part of the problem. And, I went right the way back in my time when I first joined safety. It was the messages being delivered by the safety professionals that turned me off to safety. Have I become part of the problem? So, I started looking at the services that we provided. And this is a kind of bit of a stylized graph, because I no longer have the data. So I reproduced it, but it kind of looked like this. So we had an audit process, and it was scored. And the scores were 80, 90% all the time. If you get 80, 90%, I think you're pretty relaxed in as an organization, because, that's pretty decent scores, right? Now, nobody had analysed what was actually going on beneath that. What did that score actually look like? What elements of our audit program were contributing or not? So this was the first time we'd ever done this kind of analysis. And I brought this back, and we had a brand new senior vice president safety. We had a brand new global vice president safety as well. And I was one of the senior guys. looking at this and saying, do we need a different direction? And I presented this. And I presented it in two ways. The first way you see here, we as an organisation have some pretty damn good procedures. We as an organisation are pretty damn good at execution, right? And actually our safety record was great. So you couple our safety record with the audit scores and it all kind of makes sense, right? But on leadership and engagement, the scores were kind of low air, bad, but they were low air. But actually when you looked at leadership and engagement, they were engagement with the processes. They were, leadership was about the procedure. It wasn't actually about leadership. And what I thought was really interesting was when I started plotting the volume of actions, and again, please ignore the numbers with the orange bars here, but I plotted the volume of activities, the volume of actions that we put against each of those categories in order to improve. And the safety-led audit process that said we're pretty good at procedure said that we need to do most of the work in procedural design. We're pretty good at execution, right? But the next highest level of effort was to go into improving execution. So we're polishing what we're already pretty good at. Now on leadership and engagement, very, very little activity. And when I played this back in the room, one of the safety guys said, I have to disagree with you. And I said, okay, please explain. And he said, I was doing an audit just the other week, and one of the leaders was very capable and able to explain how the observation process worked. For me, that's compliance. That's not leadership. That's not about inspiration. That's not got your back, and so on. So it crystallized in my mind what the CEO said. I don't know if you're good enough. Because what he believed that we needed to be doing to change, he didn't know what it was, but he kind of knew he wasn't getting it. And when I played back this, he kind of told me that we'd not getting it either. I didn't understand what to do about it, but I understand that change was necessary. So on change, the Middle East Business Intelligence published a white paper from a UAE construction think tank. It was more about civil engineering projects and development in UAE. And it said we need to improve. And the aspects that it said we need to improve in were, this isn't a safety thing, by the way. This is because the majority of projects in UAE, the big projects in UAE, run over budget, run over cost. Some of them don't work like they should do, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of issues with them. And the four headings that they put we need to improve in were a lack of industry collaboration, our ability to attract and retain talent, a weak culture of innovation, and a lack of industry representation. So I wanted to, it really struck a chord with me, and, I'm kind of building to some of the case studies that I have, but I kind of wanted to characterize, it's probably not particularly wise words, but I wanted to characterize kind of what I see and build on, what I said earlier on. So who is the expert and who's always right? Right? Is the person sitting at the top, client the wealthy? Is it the person in the middle, the consultant the wise? Or is it who sits at the bottom, contractor the weak? And what I see more often than not is everybody telling the contractor, the person actually swinging the hammer. The accident happened because of the way that you're swinging the hammer, and it's very easy to see that. Now, I draw from my CDM experience, right? First duty is to ask the client if they understand their role and check if they're competent, or rather you're competent in what it is that you're doing. And I go back to the first example. The client in North Africa who said, I buy by the ton, wasn't competent to make that decision because it had a huge impact on safety later on. So that, the lack of industry collaboration I see is because the powerful people further up the food chain, it's very difficult to talk to them in a way that would lose status, right? Losing status is okay if you're weak. So it tends to go right the way down to, the worker, the supervisor, and so on and so forth. It's a very easy story to tell, but it isn't always the truth. So I want to give this is a hard case study. As I say, 3.5 years ago when I came out to the Middle East, we had a few accidents after I joined with vehicles falling off mountains. One of the companies that I look after builds pylons, electricity distribution over mountains in Saudi Arabia and Oman and so on. And these images are both from Saudi Arabia and from Oman. And we'd had this accident for years, and it was explainable because the worker did something wrong, right? That's the place where you get mobile phone reception. So they must have been on the mobile phone. They were late for a break, therefore they must have been in a hurry. That's why the accident happened. You know, and over the years, that had become the way things get done around here. It's an acceptable story. And I, you know, refer back to the earlier slide, the Oxford Review paper in that, and it's easy to lose yourself in the story when you're not in a powerful position. So, you know, what was actually going on here was more fundamental, right? The image on the right-hand side, the payloader there was going up a mountain with concrete in his bucket because we couldn't get the concrete mixer up the hill. Now, the reason that we couldn't get the concrete mixer up the hill is because the road was too steep for it, because it wasn't designed for it. And when we look at the specification for the road had to be capable of taking a 4x4 vehicle. Now, the 4x4 vehicle was what the client needed to do their inspections, both during construction and onwards to do their maintenance thereafter for the electricity pylons. So in actual fact, with the Middle East business model being cheapest wins, the specification for a 4x4 road was all that anybody could afford to construct, because if you built a road differently, it would be more expensive and therefore uncompetitive. So we spoke to the client and we had a long conversation, and we managed to persuade them that actually the way to the future was to change their specification, because that would be a level playing field for the whole of construction, not just my company. But if everybody has to compete on a level playing field, then it gets to be a little bit different. And we get away. This vehicle was 20 years old. It was sitting by the side of the road with an owner-driver sort of setup. It had all of its certification that you could possibly imagine. All of the documentation was in place. But what had happened is that at some point in its life, somebody had taken apart the differentials and put them back together again. Two differentials failed, and it rolled back down the hill, and the driver couldn't control it. He lost hydraulics as well. So we've now got specifications that require maintenance and age of vehicle that we never had either. So how as professionals can we actually influence and have the courage to do it? And I've learned so much from outside of the HSE organisation, and I've never met Julia Dare. I've only ever seen her on TED Talks, but it's a very, and I would encourage you all to look at it, how to disagree productively and find common ground, right? It is very, very powerful. I've watched it many times and I get something out of it every time I do. It's 10, 15 minutes out of your life. And I would recommend that you go listen to Julia Dare, because we'll all learn something about how we can disagree, not embarrass people, and get what you want out of a conversation and still represent your interests and move on. And this is what we ended up with, right? We ended up with a specification that now gives me the ability to drive a crane, a concrete truck, a payloader, the worker transportation and all the rest of it. We can all get up the hill. This is now the standard in Oman. This is what we're talking to Saudi Arabia about just now. And you know, I'm delighted to say that year on year, we had 5 to 10 fatal accidents with people falling off mountains, not just in our company, but in other companies as well. It isn't happening anymore. So I know, because we had the courage to speak up and take the fight to the client in the politest possible way without causing any embarrassment. I know for a fact that 30, 40, 50 people have gone home in the last 2 or 3 years as a result of these improvements. So back to the construction think tank, right? Who's viewed as a problem and who's viewed as a solution? Because if you're looking for a solution, then you will listen more, like I said earlier on. That lack of industry collaboration is just hurting project delivery overall. So where's the expertise? Who's the person in the room with something to say, right? Attracting and retaining talent. People who aren't listened to don't hang around for very long. And if your business model is to, race to the bottom on pay, then you're not going to attract the people at the top of their profession. And if you don't challenge and solve problems that you have, and those problems keep occurring, you can never be innovative. So you need to collaborate with people. You need to talk about the issues that you have. You need to be able to put them on the table in a way that you can disagree productively but come up with a good answer, because that's the way that, listening to each other, we can actually improve together, right? So let's have the proper representation at the proper moment in time on a project, because if you get the right expertise in the right place, it's just going to go so much better. And I'd rather minimize those variables and deal with the problems that come up, that inevitably come up, than have a huge disagreement on something that's as fundamental and unchangeable as the workplace as designed when it's too late. So listen to and use talent. The quote up there, it's a horrible loss when passionate people stop speaking. And passionate people stop speaking when nobody asks them to contribute, right? And that, I hear it all the time. I wouldn't do it like that, but nobody asked me, right? I've stopped the safety guys writing a lot of procedures, right? All of what you saw, and I've got so many case studies where we've done the same thing the same way. We've stopped safety guys writing risk assessments and HSE plans. We've got construction and engineers writing engineering construction procedures the way that they should be and thinking risk through, and they own it. And I don't even sign off on them, right? So that giving off control back to Wile E. Coyote, right? Trust me, I'm an engineer, was a huge, huge, huge step for us to take, because people like, sign off and so on and so forth. But trust is huge, and trust is at the heart of collaboration. Absolutely. So, another cry for help. Don't perpetuate the worker and rule story, right? Just please, please, please challenge it. The reason that the big accidents happen are breakdown in communication between different organizations, because we're not talking to each other properly and we're not listening to each other. So what can you do as the client, the consultant or contractor to make sure your voice is heard? Because we owe it. And the Middle East can change. I've seen it change. I've brought the change myself. My company's brought it about. And I absolutely believe that we can lose ourselves in the story if we don't keep fighting for what we believe in. But when we do make those differences, and you can generate pride in those differences as well, it can stimulate the more engagement, more challenge, and just better conditions for us all. So my advice, right, there are some great organizations that Paul's brought together. There's some great people that Paul's brought together. I've learned so much from Sarah Brummett, Anna Keane, Rosa Carrillo that you have on. I love listening to DECRA, Paradigm, and so on and so forth. And each time I listen, I learn something new. So please don't pass through. Get engaged, get networking, and help us change, right? Because you're never, ever very far away from someone that's already faced that problem and fixed it. So get networking, and there's people there that can help us. So challenge, cry for help, whichever which way you want to look at it. I know that together we can make a difference in the Middle East, absolutely. And I'm going to hand it back to Paul.
Thank you. Fantastic, Andy. Absolutely brilliant. I mean, every single time you hear you speak, I'm always in awe of how quickly you come up with some new ideas. I mean, it's all similar to, but at the same time, the way it's presented, and like you can tell that the conversations that we've been having, since lockdown, doing virtual events, you can see how you've tailored your presentations to suit that, bringing in some fantastic stuff. The topic of curiosity, that seems like something I think we need to keep pushing. Storytelling, huge. Yeah. It's been really great to see how it's influenced you, and hopefully it's influencing others. If this is the first time you've heard these certain phrases, feel free. That's what Andy's here for, and he's a fantastic guy. He's always willing to talk more and share his story and his influence and his insights into how he runs his business and how perhaps we can be better in our roles. So let's go through some questions then. Mohammed Hanif, I think management commitment is the key for leadership development. That's from Mohammed. Thank you, Mohammed. Agreed. Clients are wealthy, consultant always wise, and the contractor weak. Phil Gilling, great presentation, Andy. Assertive followership, constructive dissent should be actively encouraged at all levels. Another thank you. Another thank you. Another thank you. Andy, you're making a big difference and great insights. Back to basics, and love how you show the poor contractor being the weak. And that was from Mr. Gary Foot. So all good comments, no necessary questions. I think that's not always a bad thing. I think that's actually sometimes a positive in the fact that people get it. People understand what you're trying to achieve, and it resonates a lot, judging by the feedback. So, Andy, I just want to say a massive heartfelt thank you for your support, as always. Thank you for doing the presentation today. And look forward to hearing your feedback on the rest of the conference when we close out tomorrow.
No problem. Again, appreciate your trust, appreciate the feedback. You've got a good thing going here, mate. I hope I can continue to participate in whatever way you want in the future. So thanks, mate. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Andrew.
Another fantastic podcast. Thank you so much for your time, Andy, and we will see you all again in the next episode.